We're not designed to make optimal use of all the nutrients and calories or whatever that come from these plant foods. We can make use of some of them in ways that are very beneficial to us, but they cannot sustain us long term without significant compromise to our physiological functioning as well as our neurological functioning. We require very high levels of fat to be able to maintain healthy and optimal brain function.
What do you think about veganism, or maybe especially raw food veganism? Because that's a different story here.
You know, it's sort of funny because there are some similar mechanisms at play with the diet I advocate with the one that raw vegans seem to enjoy, and that's that. When we were talking a little bit earlier about some of these reproductive mechanisms that can either lengthen or shorten our lives depending on what metabolic pathways are activated, insulin and those protein pathways we were talking about. If you're eating, I think that if you're eating a raw food vegan diet, you're basically kind of limiting the amount of insulin that you're producing. You're also limiting the activation of those protein pathways by quite a bit, which in the short term can give you the same benefits that have been shown in a lot of research with respect to caloric restriction. There's like 75 years worth of research in caloric restriction. For a long time they didn't know why it worked so well. Now they do, that it really has mostly to do with limiting our requirements for insulin. That the less insulin we need in the course of our lives, the longer we live and the healthier we are by far. So anything that limits our caloric intake is going to be helpful. But it turns out it's not just calories in general, it's specifically around proteins and sugars and starches that activate these particular reproductive pathways. And when we limit our intake of proteins and sugars and starches to below those thresholds, what we're actually doing in effect is upregulating our own maintenance and repair. It's literally anti-aging. So in the short term, when you're eating a raw food vegan diet, you're enjoying some of the benefits of those mechanisms. And you're also eating a lot of antioxidants, a lot of phytonutrients. You're detoxifying a lot.
You're cleansing.
You're cleansing. So anybody's going to feel better, especially if they're coming off the standard American diet. Of course they're going to feel better for a period of time doing that way. And I think that there are therapeutic applications to that dietary approach that are viable for a period of time. The problem is that, again, we don't have four stomachs. We don't have a bacterial-based digestion. We have a hydrochloric acid-based digestion. So we're not designed to make optimal use of all the nutrients and calories or whatever that come from these plant foods. We can make use of some of them in ways that are very beneficial to us, but they cannot sustain us long term without significant compromise to our physiological functioning as well as our neurological functioning, especially our neurological functioning. Our brains are made up of 80% fat, right? Our brains are fat organs. We're fatheads, all of us, like it or not. And we require very high levels of fat to be able to maintain healthy and optimal brain function. We also, 25% of all the cholesterol in the human body is actually in the brain, and it gosh darn well better be there. We need it for our neurological functioning. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of the pronounced side effects, very common side effects of statin drug use is compromised memory function and dementia-like symptoms. It's really common. I have people come into my office all the time struggling with memory and whatever, and oh, by the way, I'm on statins, so, and I don't tell anybody what to do with their drugs, but I will give them a little bit of a background on what their body needs nutritionally to maintain healthy memory function and all that. So long term, what we're talking about, with a vegan diet is something that is just simply not fully sustainable. and
For the health of the person.
for the health of the person.
Right,
Right. For the health of
because
the human
certainly
being.
there are vegans that have been vegans for decades and decades and decades and are still here.
Well, still here, but I promise you, not optimally healthy. And in the years that I've been working, because I work with people's brains every day in my practice. I do neurofeedback, and people come to me with all sorts of problems with respect to anxiety-related kinds of symptoms and attentionally based kinds of symptoms, and virtually anything that could be impacted by the brain, right? And I will tell you that the most damaged and intractable nervous systems that I have ever encountered in my work have, to the letter, all been vegetarians, and especially hardcore vegans, almost to the point where, and I'm not alone among my colleagues in my field, in the field of neurology. In fact, one of my biggest fan bases out there among professionals are actually neurologists. Dr. David Perlmutter has a slide of my book that he shows when he gives his public talks, because he gets that how important, and most neurologists do get how important the fat is to the functioning of the human brain. You can't live without that. And we need animal source fats in order for our brains to work properly. And so, vegan diets, there are many nutrients that are just simply not available to someone on a vegan diet. Everybody knows about the B12 thing, and we have a limited supply of B12, and once it's gone, it's gone. And once the damage starts to occur to our brain, to the functioning of our livers, to our blood health and whatever else, but especially to our brain, once the damage to the brain begins to occur, and there's a kind of the brain literally starts to shrink in relation to B12 deficiency. And as a matter of fact, there was a study done just a few years back where they looked at the effects of B12 deficiency on brain size and on brain shrinkage. And they found that, of course, vegetarians and vegans suffered the most brain shrinkage over the time period that the study actually occurred. And but not only that, there were two troubling things. One was that the smallest brain of the person eating a standard American diet was still larger than the largest brain of the vegetarians in the study. Over the course of that study. The other thing that was troubling was that all of these people in the study actually showed relatively normal levels of B12, which means that but the lower the levels of B12, the more brain shrinkage. There was a 1-to-1 correlation that was very clear. And what it basically says is that, well, for one thing, we definitely need to be eating more animal products and not less, but also that the standards for what we're considering okay levels of B12 are set much too low. Yeah, much too low.
Sure.
And so that the need for B12 is extremely high for optimal brain functioning, and past a certain point, that damage may not be reversible. Okay, and these are some of the most anxious, oftentimes, people. Their nervous systems are so tightly wound, oftentimes, that it's just very, very difficult to unwind that. And they tend to have a very difficult time responding to things that are, to things like neurofeedback. Sometimes I can make some headway with them, but one of the things I'm fond of telling people when they come in through the door is that I can come up with the best brain training protocol in the world for you, but it's not going to put a nutrient there that's not there. It's not going to take away some interfering substance that doesn't belong there. The brain and the body need certain raw materials in order to function, period. Now, I am sympathetic as I can be to what might drive a person to choose a vegetarian or vegan diet. I've been there. I've for a lot of the same reasons. You know, a lot of these people care passionately about not only their own health, but the health of the planet and what might be sustainable for the long term. The thing that you might find if you dig deep enough is that many of the things that you're told are true about that. You know, the opposite may be true in a lot of measures. But when it comes to, you know, many people eating a kind of a paleo approach to diet, and a lot of raw food vegans, I think, have more in common than they don't have in common. We all want a sustainable, healthy, and humanely raised food supply. We all want that. None of us want to see corporations running amok and controlling what we eat and how we live in this world. I think we're all fighting for, in essence, the same thing. We're trying to be healthy, and we're trying to do things sustainably. And I think if we're better able to focus on what we have in common in that regard, and we apply our passions toward this bigger picture, that there's so much more that we can accomplish. If we just sort of disintegrate into this divisive sort of mudslinging of who's right and who's wrong about the idea of whether or not we should be eating animal source foods, you know, Monsanto wins.
The divide and conquer.
Exactly. It's the oldest war tactic in the book.
And if we're going to niggle about that,
absolutely,
they're going to take it. They are.
Right. Well, and they are. And they're taking control of all of it. The other thing I'll say, though, is that there probably isn't a single major corporation that I can think of off the top of my head that isn't heavily invested in every man, woman, and child on this planet eating a carbohydrate-based diet. Okay? Because if we are, you know, Monsanto wins. Again,
yes.
Ultimately.
Yes.
And the more we take back our ancestral roots and we eat the diet that our ancestors ate, we go back to what is the most natural to our physiological makeup. You know, it's almost as good as giving Monsanto the finger.
I was just saying, it's truly fighting back. It's saying, you know, no thanks to the carbs, no thanks to the sugar, no thanks to the high fructose corn syrup, no thanks basically to all the processed foods,
and
all
to the
food
grains,
industry, and the grains,
you know,
that
legumes and whatever,
are inflammatory.
soybeans,
Oh yeah,
GMOs.
It's
you
like,
know.
yeah, this is, in a sense, it's regaining our health and regaining our independence and our freedom to really nourish ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to our most fundamental roots as a species and recognizing who we are and how we got to be where we are and taking control of that again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, my guest Nora Gaudas, author of Primal Body, Primal Mind, and I'd add, towards healthy people and a healthy planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.